about time to get started, and I'm very excited about our program today. As a part of the Literary Fest, and Lynn, I guess this is about the final program for this year, and it's been we saved the best for last because it's been a rich series of programs with the museum and the library and the luncheon. It's just been a lot of good things that our community has offered, and we're all book lovers in here, and that's a big deal. When growing up with books is wonderful, and so as we reach the end of this year's programs, I'm so glad it's Julie Cantrell. Perennials, her latest book, was our community read, and a lot of people who are not here today have read this book, but a lot of them work, and a lot of them just came and got the book, and we don't know who they were. You know, I'm thinking, why didn't we keep a list of these people? How did we not do this? But, you know, a lot of people have read this book here, and they appreciate the fact that you wove our location into this story. It made us feel really good. But most of you in the room know Julie, and you know that she's a New York Times bestseller, and she was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She now lives in Oxford and has 2 children. And she's done a lot of different things in the writing world. And she edits, she does nonfiction, she does fiction, and she's won a lot of awards. In 2011, the Mississippi Arts Commission Literary Artist Fellowship. In 2013, she was the recipient of the Mississippi Library Association Fiction Award, which happens at this time of year. The 2013 Christie Award for First Novel, the 2014 Carroll Award, and in 2017 she was a finalist for the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Fiction Award. So that's a lot of accolades. We can't wait to see what you're going to do next, but today, let's welcome Julie Cantrell.
Thank you all so much for welcoming me back. I say this every time I come to New Albany, but I really do sincerely mean this is my favorite place to come and be a part of an event. Your community has welcomed my stories and supported my work since the very first novel, Into the Free. And you have stayed with me for 4 novels now through your library and your churches and the museum. And I can't tell you how much that's meant to me as a person who just decided to try on a whim to write a novel and see if I could do it. To know that somewhere out there somebody has found those stories and taken time to read those stories makes me feel like we've connected somehow across the universe. And to walk into a room like this and know that not only have we found each other somehow, but maybe some of you even feel like we know each other somehow. We've shared something with one another. That means everything to me. So thank you all for being a part of my life and for being here today. Thank you. Most of you I do know, and you've heard me speak before, so I'm not going to go into the whole background again about how I came to write in the first place. But I will tell you that I always wrote as a little girl, and I always read. So I've spent most of my life reading and writing, and that's helped me process the world. By nature, I'm an emotional person, and I process the world through feelings. And writing has kind of been my way to sort through that and to process things. And I knew that even as a very, very young child. When I would turn to my journal, that was just the way I worked through what I was seeing and experiencing and feeling. As I grew up, those journals became more and more about the people around me and trying to understand the choices that we make as people in this life. So what makes good people do bad things? Because nobody's really all bad, right? And so that's kind of what I started to explore in my journals. I wanted to understand why the people I loved or the people I knew or the people I interacted with were doing things that maybe I wouldn't have done, choices that I wouldn't have made. Did it make them bad people? Were they evil? Or were they just making choices based on where they were in life and the circumstances that they were facing and doing the best they knew to do? along the way, I read and read and read, and eventually I had a teacher who encouraged me to write my first foray into fiction when she asked us to journal as if we were a character from To Kill a Mockingbird. And so I started journaling as if I were Scout. I was in ninth grade. I was 13 or 14 years old at the time. And it was my first time to write from someone else's brain, from the lens of another person to see the universe. And I just fell in love with that escape. And it became a tool for me to understand people in an even deeper way by, as Atticus says in the story, crawling inside someone else's skin and walking around in it. And that's what writing fiction kind of became for me. Unfortunately, I crossed paths with another teacher along the way who convinced me that I should not study writing, that it would be a waste of my scholarship to study writing, that I would never make it as a writer. And I was 17, and she was older and wiser, and I believed that she knew what was best for me. So I didn't. I never took a writing class in college. I went to school. I became a speech therapist, which I love. But I regret not studying writing too, because deep down I knew that's who I was. And that's what the skill that I had to offer, the talent that I had to offer to the world. I'm not saying I'm talented. It was just who I am. It took me a long, long time to circle back around to who I am. And what I learned from that process was we already know who we are. We already know what we really have to offer this world, but sometimes we start to believe the wrong voices about ourselves. We start to absorb the lies about who we are and our unworthiness and our flaws and our faults, and we start to forget that we are loved and we are here for a purpose and we have a real reason to be here and connect with one another and something of value to share. So I believe that most of you in this room are definitely readers, and many of you are writers. And so today I want to talk to you about what writing has meant to me and why I believe in the power of story. Do y'all remember the show Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers? I loved that show when I was a child, and I still love Mr. Rogers. I love his tender spirit and his open heart and his willingness to be kind and vulnerable in a world where men are not really supposed to be kind and vulnerable. And he was anyway. And to me, that shows a strength and a manliness that we don't get to see very much anymore. And I honor his spirit for that. Mr. Rogers said many wise things in his lifetime, but one of my favorite quotes comes from him. He said, "There isn't anyone you couldn't learn to love once you've heard their story." To me, that's everything. That's the power of story. That's why we tell stories. That's why I write stories. Because I want people to learn to love one another and to connect with one another and understand one another and have empathy for one another again. I believe we can do that through story. Stories help us understand one another, and they remind us we're not alone out here in this great, big, scary, hard world. There are others like us, and we can find each other and connect with each other through that page. I also believe that life kind of comes down to two things: how we handle our pain and how we process the truth. As a writer, that's what I try to explore in my stories. I want to examine how my characters handle their wounds and their pain and their traumas, and how they restore their truth. Ultimately, I hope I can guide my readers along that same path and help you process your pain and handle your truth. So if you're going to write a story, I encourage you to do the same thing and keep that in mind as you're creating your characters and your story. Another thing I believe in life is that with every breath and every step we take, we're making choices. And every choice matters. Everyone trickles out. With every choice, we can choose to move toward the light or to move toward the dark. And with every person we pass, we can nudge them toward the light or toward the dark. And every choice we make and they make is going to ripple out and affect the people in their paths. So we're constantly moving energy one way or the other, right? And we're constantly moving other people one way or another. That's what I want you to keep in mind too as you're building your stories and thinking about who your characters are and which way they're heading and when they get off track and how we're going to steer them back in the right direction. Every choice matters. One thing that happens as we go along life's path is we get hurt. All of us suffer. It's part of the human journey. We all experience trauma and tragedy and grief and loss and suffering and wounds that we never see coming. And then we have to deal with that injury. And some of us handle it in different ways than others. And some of us heal better than others. And some of us heal more completely than others. Some of us can carry our pain and some of us choose to transfer it onto other people because it's more than we can hold. So I like to examine those kind of things in my stories. There's another quote that I really love. It's from an actress named Stella Adler. And she once said, "Life beats down and crushes the soul. And art reminds you you have one." I love that quote. And that's why we have the creative spirit in us, to remind us to feel again. Because sometimes after we've been hurt so terribly by life, again and again and again and again, do you know what we do to survive? We can't take another blow. We know we can't handle any more pain. Not my pain, not your pain. I'm full of pain. And so you know what I do? What we do as people to survive, we harden up, or we wall ourselves off, or we hide and we become numb and apathetic. So we either shut people off behind a wall and we don't care about their pain and their misery and their suffering anymore because we just can't deal with it. Or we throw hate and judgment and criticism at them because surely they must have done something to deserve that, because that keeps us safe and at a distance from it. It means it won't happen to us. So how as writers do I make people care about my characters? Characters whose stories, if they were in the real world, those same readers might not pay attention to or care about. For example, every day on the news, we can read about or see images of women who are suffering domestic violence. How many times do we feel empathy for those women versus judging them or criticizing them or blaming them for the situation they're in? How many times do we see a victim of sexual assault or rape and say she did something to deserve that? It's her fault for being in that situation. It's her fault for responding the way she did to that pain and that trauma. We wall ourselves off instead of reaching out and caring and being empathetic and compassionate. So if I'm going to write a story about a domestic violence victim or a sexual assault victim, as I did in Into the Free, how am I going to make you care about a fictional person if you don't even care about a real person? One way I've learned as a writer to make people feel again and care again is that even people who kind of numb to that news story, if the news shows them a stray dog suffering, they care. They may not care anymore about people, but you can still tap that soul inside when you show them a hungry, starving dog in the gas station parking lot. And so what did I do in Into the Free? I created a scene in the beginning where the mother dog eats her puppies. It's a terrible scene. I don't love graphic, terrible, violent scenes like that. But I put it in there on purpose because if I could make you care about that dog, I've reminded you you still have a soul. I've woken up that part of you that can care about somebody again. And if you can care about that dog, maybe then later you can care about Millie and her mother when they get attacked. And if I can make you care about two fictional characters when they get hurt, maybe when you close the book, you're going to care about the lady on the news and the neighbor next door and the woman in the church pew and yourself again. We aim to remind people they have a soul. When I wrote The Feathered Bone, I wrote about human trafficking. Again, not a subject I wanted to write about. I followed it, the nudge. I surrendered to what I was being called to do. But if I wrote a novel about a prostitute, how many people would want to read that and care about an adult female prostitute? How many times do we look at women who are prostitutes with judgment and criticism and blame and shame? How many times do we feel apathetic or unsympathetic to them and think they must have done something to deserve that. It's a defensive, protective mechanism so that we can believe the false belief that it will never happen to us. It could never happen to us. The truth is it could happen to any of us because life can barrel anybody down. But how did I make people care about human trafficking? If I can't give you an adult prostitute and make you care about her, what if I make that trafficking victim a child? What if I make that little girl a preacher's daughter who had been described as being angelic and pure and innocent? You would care. And so if I can make you care about that little girl being sold through the sex trade, then maybe I can make you care about the woman who abducted her by the end of the book too. Maybe I can make you care about the families who are suffering because their child is missing. And maybe I can make you understand by the end that we all start off innocent and pure and angelic. And nobody deserves to have to sell their body to survive. And maybe by the end of the book, you'll become a human trafficking advocate and help rescue people out of that life. That's my goal as a writer, to remind you you have a soul and to make you care again. Life has tried to shatter our souls, and we have to reclaim them. And story helps us do that. Fiction gives us a passageway into exploring those deep, dark topics and those hard truths that we don't want to face in reality. I think of it like Mary Poppins when she said, "A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down." I can deliver this to you in fiction. There's no way most of my novel readers are going to go to a bookstore and pick up a nonfiction book about human trafficking. It's too dark. It's too much. And I would have never done that. I would have probably turned off the news when those stories came on. It's too much to hold. But if I can give it to you with a spoonful of sugar in a story that might hold your interest, that might make you care about this little girl, you've grown. By the end of the story, you've grown. And that's my goal. Our most effective communicator, I believe, in the world understood that story was the most powerful vehicle for getting a message through to somebody. His name was Jesus. He got his message across by saying, "Come, let me tell you a story." And that's what we aim to do as storytellers. Come, let me tell you a story. Now, underneath that story is a really deep message and a deep meaning that's meant to help us grow emotionally and spiritually and be born again with this fresh, open heart and soul. But even Jesus knew not everybody is going to receive that story the way he intends it to be. He said, those with ears will hear, those with eyes will see, and the rest of them, he didn't even fight that battle. So as an artist, a creator, a storyteller, you have to accept that your job is to tell the story. Let it flow through you as the vehicle to let it enter the universe, and the rest is up to God. You cannot control how a reader is going to react, how they're going to respond, and you have to remember that art is subjective. So, around this room, many of these paintings moved me to tears, especially the ones about perennials. I guess that's my pride speaking. I was so moved by that a verse in a book could lead to that, or this. The creative spark that shoots from one person to another and leads to all these new creations in the world. I'm just moved by that somebody could read those words and come up with this in their mind and then share it with us and feel and make me cry. Think about that. But nobody can control when they're painting that painting or telling that story how someone's going to respond. And the way I respond one day might make a different response another day because I'm at a different place along my journey. We hear a song when we're a teenager, it means everything to us. 30 years later, we can't relate to that song at all. We're a different person then. We respond in different ways. That's the power of art, though, and you can't take it personally. If I start to take my criticisms and my reviews personally or my praise personally, if I start to think all those awards are about me, my ego will inflate, and that won't be good for any of us. And if I start to think my one-star reviews are about me, my ego will shrink and I'll be so fragile and frail, that won't be good for any of us. So I have to understand none of it's about me. So when you write your story, don't let that fear stop you from writing and sharing what you have to tell. When you write a memoir, as I understand many of you plan to do, you follow the same rules as you do when you're writing a novel. It's called creative nonfiction, and you try to follow a narrative arc. Nobody's going to want to read your life series of journals from the day you were born till the day that you wrote the journal, right? You can't tell us everything in your life. So what you're going to do is imagine the photographs, the little snapshots of those moments, those highlight pivotal moments that added up. Think of it as pebbles. When you look back, you can see where the pebbles were that God was placing in your path. And you might not have known where they were going or even realized they were those stepping stones. But now that you're looking back, you realize it all made sense and it led you to who you are today. You're going to write your memoir like it's those little scenes of snapshots of memoirs. Believe it or not, that's how I come to my stories too. When I start a novel, they usually start with a spark like a question. I'm curious to know about something. Whether with Into the Free, who was Kelly Mitchell? Who was Kelly Mitchell? The gypsy queen who was buried in Meridian, Mississippi. Why was she there? How did she die? Why was she buried there? What was her funeral like? Who are the Romany travelers? I have this curious mind, and so I want to go find out. It leads me to a story idea. But I don't have the story yet. The story actually surfaces for me, every one of them, with a vision. I hate to call it a vision, an image that kind of comes to mind. I don't know how they come to me. I don't know what puts all of those pieces together to form this vision. But when it hits me, then I know there's my characters, there's my story. With Into the Free, I could picture very carefully a little girl in a sweet gum tree. And she was looking down at this ramshackle little cabin. And on the porch was her mother, just broken by life, poor and depressed and just broken. And she's looking out into the distance over the fields, and she sees a colorful caravan of gypsies. And they're singing, and they're alive, and they're free. And all of a sudden, I had to ask myself, who are these people? What do they want? What are they afraid of? What's stopping them from getting what they want? And what's at stake if they don't get what they want? And then ultimately, what do they have to teach me? That's what we do as storytellers. Then I build a story around that and try to find the answers. I don't know when I start to write it. I have to figure it out. Same thing with Perennials. I saw an image of a mother in her flower garden with 2 daughters. I put that scene in the book where she sees a photograph of her, and there's like an awakening. In that garden, I could see the mother reading to her daughters, and one daughter was free-spirited and happy and joyful and positive, and the other daughter is just locked in a prison of insecurity. And she's looking at her sister with spite and hate and jealousy because she can't be that, and she wants to be. And then I had to again ask, who are these people? What do they want? What's stopping them from getting it? What are they afraid of? What do they have to teach me? You're going to do the same thing with your memoir. You're going to look at those snapshot moments of your life and go back and tell us who you are, what you wanted, how you got it, what you had to lose to get there, who was trying to stop you or what was trying to stop you, and ultimately the message that you want to tell us, that you want to tell the world. I believe everybody has a story to tell. And I also believe that everybody has somebody who needs to hear that story or read that story. As women, we have been traditionally conditioned to be quiet. If it's not nice, don't say it. Keep sweet. Smile. Shh. Be nice. That has silenced our voices for far too long. And what it has done is make us bury our truths. Truths that we have not been allowed to say. Truths that we have not been allowed to heal. Truths that we have not been allowed to share to teach others who come behind us. Somebody behind you needs to hear that truth. You know why? Because she's going through the same thing you already went through. And you can show her the way through it and show her that not only can she come through it, she can be stronger and better on the other side. Somebody needs to know how to do that before it destroys them. And you have the power to help her by sharing your story. In the end, if you share your story, you will help somebody learn to handle their pain and process their truth. And that's everything. So you all have a story to tell, and I strongly encourage you to all go home and write it. Thank you. I'm going to, I know that some of you have questions about Perennials and some of you have questions about writing. So I wanted to leave time for y'all to ask any questions at all, or you can ask me privately if you're uncomfortable asking by a group, but I'm sure other people can benefit from the questions that you ask and the information that we share. Or I can just talk more. But I wanted to give y'all time for that discussion if you had any questions. I'll tell you how the Featherbone came to be. I went to a place called the Hope House in Louisiana. Unfortunately, it flooded in the 2016 Great Floods, and it's not there anymore. But it was a rescue facility in my home parish, Livingston Parish, and it was established as a nonprofit to help women who were trying to come out of trafficking. My mother had been volunteering there and helping to build the place and build it up. She'd been going for more than a year every week. And finally had a chance to go with her down there to build a library for these women. And while I was there, I sat on the porch with a couple of the women who were some of the first residents there. And I heard their stories. I had never sat and had a conversation with a prostitute. I never knew I would. And what I realized in that moment is that life sent them one way and me one way by chance. It could have been me in that chair and her in this chair, and we really don't have as much control over those things as we think. When I heard their stories, I cared. I still didn't want to write about it, but I went home and I started reading about it and learning about it, and I couldn't silence that nudge that was telling me that's what I needed to explore. I spent 2 years reading every book I could find about women and girls who had been kidnapped, who had been trafficked, who had come through the sex trade, who had survived it. I went and toured different facilities trying to help. I went out to Texas and visited with Still Creek Ranch, one of the only facilities in the country that helps children who are removed from the sex trade. And when I met these people and heard their stories, I knew somebody had to give them a voice. And as I was reading about it, I came across Elizabeth Smart's story, and hers was different. She, like the others, had suffered from Stockholm Syndrome. When they tried to do y'all remember Elizabeth Smart? She was kidnapped. This was a girl in Utah in a very secure, safe family situation. A 2-parent home on a second-floor bedroom with alarms in the house, both parents home, siblings, sharing a bedroom with her sister. A man comes to the second-floor window, puts a knife to her throat, and tells her, if you scream, I'm going to kill your family. Well, immediately he has control over her by fear. Psychological abusers control us by threatening to hurt what we love. And you stay a prisoner in that fear because you're trying to protect the things you love. She did not scream. She followed him out that window, and she became his prisoner in the most horrific way for months, chained and tied to a tree in the mountains behind her house. And when they finally found her, the person who saw her on the streets months later, I think it was 7 months for her, and she was out in the open by that point. She had been so conditioned and trained to be his prisoner that he no longer had to keep her in chains. He could prance her right down the middle of the street because she no longer knew who she was. He had brainwashed her completely. And when somebody asked her, are you Elizabeth? She did not claim to be Elizabeth. Now, he had only had her for 7 months. And he had completely erased her reality and her truth. But the difference in Elizabeth's story and many of the other stories I read is that when she did come home, she still had that deep core of faith and that secure family system that reminded her of her truth and helped her process her pain and helped restore her to her whole self again. And because of that, she may always have wounds and scars that she carries from this, no doubt, especially now that they've let the woman out of prison. It's insane. But she has gone on to live a healthy life and become a full human being again. And what I wanted to examine in The Feathered Bone is, how do we survive our traumas in that way? We may not all experience what Elizabeth Smart experienced, thank heavens, and I wish nobody ever did. But we all experience trauma, and if we can cling to our deep faith and find a way to find that one true voice, even if we don't have somebody in our life giving that to us, we still have it deep inside. And so that's kind of what I ended up exploring in The Feathered Bone. I just couldn't ignore it anymore. I still didn't know why I had to write that book until I got all the way through with the novel. 90,000 words and 2 years of research. And I finally went, light bulb. Now I get the message. Now I know what they're trying to tell me. And for me, it was, we have many ways of being enslaved in this lifetime. It's not just trafficking. Trafficking was the concrete way I could make you understand slavery. But there's so many ways we allow somebody to imprison our spirits, and we surrender our souls, our bodies, our minds to a predator in many, many different ways, whether that be a person, an abuser, or a drug or alcohol or depression or a job, any kind of thing that becomes what controls us. That's what it meant to me. I don't know what it meant to everybody else. If we can remember, and I know I keep bringing my faith into this, it's just how I see the world, because if we can remember that we are all children of God, and that when God looks down on us, it doesn't matter what we've done or how much we've messed up our lives or how many bad choices we've made, we're still his innocent, pure, angelic children. And he still loves us so wholly and completely and unconditionally, no matter what we've done, because it's just part of our journey. That's the challenge, is to remember who we are. And so when I look at all of you, I don't see mistakes and flaws, and I don't even see the body, honestly. When I see people, I see the soul. And that's what I want to remind us to do. We're all just spirits and souls, kind of walking around this plane. This is just a car we're in. I can't outline very well, because now sometimes I will kind of sketch it out because the publisher needs an idea that I'm actually have a story to write. It never ends up being that because when I start to try to control it, I realize I'm forcing a story, and that's not what I want to do. If I let those characters just speak through me, and I don't mean it in a hokey pokey way, like I'm hearing voices and all of that. I don't know how to put it into words, but if I just surrender myself to the natural flow of the story and let them do what they came here to do, as a parent, in a way, we watch our children make terrible choices and it kills us, and we want to stop them from making those mistakes, but we really can't. It's their journey, and we have to just love them from a distance. I do the same thing with my characters, as painful as it is to let them have the wheel. I have to let go of the wheel. Well, that's a very good question, because as much as I do let them steer, there are always wrong turns that take us away from the direction of the story. So every single word, every single character, every single scene, every single action has to always drive us toward whatever it is we're aiming for in that particular story. So keep in mind on every page what your characters want, what they're afraid of, who's trying to stop them, or what situation is trying to stop them, what's at stake. All of those, keep those questions in mind with every scene. If it's driving you off on a wrong turn, you need to kind of nudge them back to, it's taking away from the forward movement of the story. And so you'll know that. Sometimes you won't know it till you finish your whole draft, and you have to go cut out a whole character or a whole scene or a whole chapter. But you do it. And they say that cut your darlings. Some of your favorite beautiful language is just superfluous. It's not helping the story. It's slowing it down. How do you deal with evil? I think right. I think I wrestle with that a lot, because I like to believe, like I said in the beginning, that none of us are all bad. And yet, I do believe there are people who surrender to evil. And I do believe that they exist to cause pain and suffering and evil onto others. And her abductor is a perfect example. He wasn't well. He wasn't a rationally minded, sane, normal human being. Normal, rational, sane, healthy minded human beings do not behave that way. And when we apply our rational lens to someone like that and think, And we start making excuses for them. Oh, they can't help it. Or, oh, he was abused as a child. Or, oh, he doesn't mean it. Or, oh, he loves her deep down. Right? We come up with all these excuses when people do evil things. And we forget that they are, again, making their choices. And we have the power to love them from a safe distance, still hold them accountable for the choices they're making, but not let them nudge us toward the dark. We have the responsibility to guide this little soul in this little car to the light, no matter what obstacles come in my way and try to stop me from getting there. And that's what we forget, especially as women, because again, that's not very nice to say no. That's not very nice to stand up to him. That's not very nice to say what you want. But you know where you need to be going, and you know the truth, and you know that there are people trying to stop you along the way. And you just have to remember that inner voice and that discernment that's going to help you realize good from evil. Is he completely unredeemable? I don't believe anybody is. I think as a Christian, anybody can choose to come back and redeem themselves and be a good person again and choose the light again. Will somebody like he ever do that? Probably not. He may be too far gone. But I'm not going to believe it's impossible, because I think anything is impossible. But I do think we have to be clear-headed when we examine. If we believe in good, then we have to believe in evil. If we believe in light, we have to acknowledge the darkness. It's just real. Here's the trick. Here's the challenge as a writer, a published writer, because you want to give away enough and not too much. And you have to pace it out like little breadcrumbs so that your reader doesn't feel like they have a bait and switch. Like they're expecting one thing and whoa, this came out of nowhere. And yet you want the element of surprise, but they have to on some level be ready for it so they feel smart when they get there and they don't feel fooled. Exactly. And yet you don't want it to be so contrived that they see it coming. So it's hard. And sometimes I get it right and sometimes I don't. And some readers think it's perfect and some readers don't. It just depends. It's like throwing a football, and either your wide receiver's going to catch it or they don't. You can't control it, but you do the best you can to get it in the right place at the right time. It's the same way as a story writer, but it's a team sport. It's hard though. It is. I would call those my critique readers. So it's really important, if you're going to be writing, that you have a small, even one writer friend who understands that you're trying to perfect your craft. And she understands you're not going to have your feelings hurt if she tells you, I don't get this character, I don't understand this scene, this isn't working, this was too slow and I got bored and I tuned out. You need that feedback. You need real positive critique feedback. So if you can find a trusted critique partner or a trusted critique circle, it will help you all. And you share that back and forth. It's very beneficial. I don't know writers who don't have critique partners. Then after you get through that little first round, here's what I've learned with that. I like to use about 5 critique partners if I can find them. People are busy. It's kind of a big favor to ask somebody. So if you can exchange something for them. But if you hear what you'll hear when you give it to a reader, one critique partner might say this and the other one might say the complete opposite. So those kind of just wash each other out. That's your subjective response, that whatever it is. But if 2 or 3 start to tell you the same thing over and over again about a certain scene or character or chapter, you better pay attention to that spot. That's what I call a hot spot, and it needs some work. Listen. And don't let your ego get in the way. It's not about anybody hurting your feelings. They're trying to help you build the best story you can build, and you appreciate them for that. Then once you get through all that, you'll have editors, real editors, that come in and help you even more shape the story structure, shape the characters, get the pacing right, the voice, the point of view, all that kind of stuff. And then you have usually 3 or 4 rounds of editing before you get down to the little stuff like the commas and the periods and the capitalizations and that kind of stuff. So there's just lots of rounds of refining. You should never publish your first draft, ever. Well, as a mother, I describe every birth as a different kind of labor and delivery, just like children. And you never know how it's going to happen, and you can't control how it happens, and you just have to kind of surrender to the flow of what's happening. And that's how it's been with all 4 of my novels. I've been at different places in my life with all 4 novels. So I'll kind of tell you how each one happened for me. Into the Free, I was a mother with young kids, very busy lifestyle. As most women, I'm going to go write I'm going to take time to go write a novel because I want to. I mean, it's just not going to happen in my life, right? So, but I really just couldn't silence that part of myself anymore. I had silenced it for 21 years, and I really wanted to see if I could write a book. And so I woke up from 3 to 5 in the morning before anybody else would need me. I never told anybody I was writing it, and I gave myself 3 months, Monday through Friday, from 3 to 5 a.m. It was just for me. And it was a beautiful spiritual moment in my life. It was just sacred to me. And by the end, I had this story, Into the Free, and I never planned to tell anybody or show anybody. But Millie wouldn't leave me alone. And I finally realized it wasn't my story to keep. It was a story given to me for a reason, and I was being called to share it. And I finally just took the plunge and jumped off the ledge. And I didn't know how to write a book or how to publish a book, but that's the draft I sold. It was edited after that, but I wrote that in 3 months for 2 hours a day for 5 days. If I could do that with no clue, I was just a reader, anybody can do that. And that's the book that went on to become an international bestseller and all the awards and all of that kind of stuff. So it was meant to be in the universe. And if I had silenced her voice, I can't tell y'all, I still get letters today from readers whose lives have been changed by Millie's story, whose wounds have been healed, whose truths have resurfaced because of Millie. When Mountains Move was an entirely different experience. I had no idea what I was in for when Into the Free was successful. Everything exploded. I was getting interviews stacked up, emails by the hundreds every day that I was trying to respond to every one because I didn't want anybody to feel unheard, and interviews and events. And I was still trying to be a full-time mom and a teacher in the schools. I was a speech therapist in the schools, and we had started an organic farm out in Oxford, so I was farming. My kids had very busy, active lives too. So I literally had to just do When Mountains Move in spurts, in the carpool line, in the dentist chair, in the salon, anytime at all while I'm cooking that I had a moment, I would try to just bleed that story onto the page. And the universe worked against me at every turn. I was on a plane going to an event. My laptop got jangled. I lost the whole book almost when I was done. I learned a lesson about backing up my files, but I had to rewrite it. Then I rewrote the ending 7 different times because I couldn't quite get it right. I'm still not sure I got it right, but I'm happy with it. And then they decided to publish it more, market it as a romance more, because romance is they make money. And you learn once you're in the publishing industry that once you turn it over, it's not fully yours anymore. You have to follow the lead of your editor and your publisher to an extent. And so I had to rewrite the beginning to kind of feel more like a romance, and they packaged the front more like a romance. I had to insert some. So there were all these little things. I just never thought that book was going to quite get there, but it did. So I can't tell you how long that took. It was in spurts. And then the Feathered Bone, I finally had a few days off a week of quiet writing time. So there were like 3 days a week that I was home writing in a quiet house, and that was a whole different experience. So I did that one in about 4 months, and that was deep work. And then Perennials, I like to say Perennials took me 40 years and 3 weeks, because I had never suffered writer's block before. People have asked me about writer's block before. I couldn't understand that. But sometimes life does put you in a space where you just can't create. That's another part that we wall off and lose sometimes, but we need it. And the story was brewing for a long, long time, but I couldn't get it on the page no matter how hard I tried. And I was up against this deadline. And if you don't turn in your manuscript, you have to pay your money back. They've paid you in advance to write that book, and you either deliver or you pay. So I had a choice, pay or write a story. And I had 3 weeks left to do it. I could have never believed that I could write Perennials in 3 weeks. But I figured I'll write what I can, I'll turn it in, and then we'll fix it on the other end. But at least I will have met my contract obligation. And believe it or not, that's the story that got edited least of all of them. And that taught me a lesson that sometimes we make things harder than they need to be. Now, I couldn't have written a book in 3 weeks without 20 years of writing practice and learning and reading and all of the things that led me to that point. But that's how Perennials came to be. Didn't they do a great job? Exactly. They did a wonderful job. My publisher is Thomas Nelson, and they do a phenomenal. It's HarperCollins, a division of HarperCollins. They have the best design team there at Thomas Nelson, and the Feathered Bone too. I thought they did a brilliant job on both of those covers. They both made me cry when I saw them because I thought they get it. They get it, and it does make a difference. That's what draws you to it on the shelf, right? So thank you. Who even reads the inside? We just want a pretty cover. What's next? Okay, I was saying a smart author, which I am apparently not, follows the rules of creating a brand, and then they kind of have this, you know those authors that you see their books and they're all kind of packaged the same. They have serials and characters or themes that you know what you're getting. I haven't followed those rules. Every one of my novels are very different. And I started with children's books, then I did 2 historical fiction, then 2 contemporary fiction, and now I'm doing creative nonfiction. So I was just finishing this week someone else's memoir that will come out in July. It's a man who grew up in Georgia, and he was born very, very poor in a very neglectful, abusive environment. His family was a cotton mill family. They lived in the Mill Village in LaGrange, Georgia. And he was born a musical prodigy, but his family didn't know what to do with his gifts and his talents, and so he was actually locked away from music and not allowed to play. But eventually, life led him back to his innate talents, and he found his truth, and he used music to heal his wounds. And he went off and lived his dream of landing the lead role in Stephen Sondheim's Broadway play on New York. And so he accomplished a lot of things in his life. But he gave it all up to come back home to a little town in Georgia and be a teacher and start this thing called the Music and Drama Troupe. And he has, for the next 40-something years, mentored other youth and brought out their creative talents. And the reach he has had has been phenomenal. So it's one of those stories like Mr. Holland's Opus or something where he just had this amazing impact on this little southern town at a time when everything was divided. Class, race, religion, and he brought everybody together through music. It's a beautiful story, so I'm excited to share that. It's called Crescendo, and it'll be out this summer. And then I think I'm going to stay in that space for a little while and write some more creative nonfiction for people. If I hit you over the head with something, you're just going to hate me, and you're going to be hurt, right? I don't know if I can put into words how to do it. I think try to find something that makes you feel and makes you care and makes you feel empathy and compassion for that, if it's your own journey. I never do anything to cause intentional harm. So when I say we need to speak our truths, we need to speak our truths. It's not my job to destroy a person who hurt me. I'm not speaking. Think about Jesus when he came back. This is big to me. When Jesus came back from the cross and he resurrected from the tomb, well, first of all, he's crucified, right? And you don't have to be religious to buy into this, okay? Just go with me. He's crucified on the cross. He's put in the tomb. And first, he stays there and heals a little bit. He gives himself time to heal, to process his wounds, right? His hurts, to deal with his pain. And then he comes out and he processes his truth. And what does he say when he comes back from the tomb? He says, touch my hands. Look at my wounds. Let me show you what I have survived. Let me show you the proof of my pain. Let me tell you the way to come back from this kind of hurt. He didn't keep it secret. And he didn't show everybody his pain and his suffering and his trauma and his truth because he was angry at the people who hurt him. He said, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Forgive them. He wasn't trying to take revenge. He wasn't trying to get pity or sympathy or be the victim. He came back and he told his truth because he wanted to show the people behind him who suffered how to come through their suffering. That's what I mean by own your truth. Not to get revenge, not to seek pity or sympathy, not to hurt another person, but to show other people the way. That's how you soften the truth. I tried to choose, if you think about the names in Perennials, so you have Fisher and Finn. They kind of go together, right? And they're the brothers. And Fisher is, and to me, it's kind of like that fisher of men. He's seeking something good in the world. He's kind of he's the truth sayer. He's the truth teller. He's the one who helps Lovey in the end remember her truth, right? So yeah, he's the fisher of men in a way. I have Chief, the dad, who's the leader, and he's just Mr. Chief, and he's masculine, but he's a good masculine. He's caring, and he used his masculine strength and his masculine energy to protect his family and the people he loves, to defend them, to rally them together, to lead them. That's masculinity to me. He doesn't use it in an abusive way to hurt the people who rely on him. That's not how he shows his strength. He shows his strength by standing up and caring about them. That's Chief. Laurel is the mother. When I think of a mountain laurel, I think of this beautiful, tender flower that's very delicate, and yet it's so strong. Mountain laurels live in some of the most extreme, windy environments. They're constantly being battered. That's Laurel. She was sweet and southern and polished and beautiful, and yet she had an inner strength in her that kept her through some stuff. And she kept her head up through it all the way to the end. And then there's Bitsy. We all know what Bitsy is. And then there's Lovey. And they had to kind of figure out who they were in the story. They both were trying to figure out who they were. Bitsy was lost. The only identity she had was this false identity of this trophy wife. And everything in her life was fake. Her marriage was fake. Her identity was fake. Her hair was fake. Her body was fake. Everything was fake, right? She had lost her true self. And it was a painful way back for her. And we don't see her get all the way there in the book, and we don't know if she ever will. Some people don't. But she starts to have to wake up by the end of the book, and Lovey's there to guide her because Lovey's already been through the flames. And one thing about Finn is he's the one who has all the external wounds, right? He's the one that looks the most damaged from the outside. He's survived a fire. And yet he was the most whole and healthy of them all. And Bitsy, who looked so perfect, was the most broken on the inside, the most damaged. So they all had their meanings, yeah. I think Lovey lost, again, she had two things she was struggling. Dealing with the pain that she had felt from childhood, the hurt that her sister had inflicted on her all her life, the hurt that she felt by her parents not really standing up and defending her and loving her the way she needed to be loved through those painful moments. The guilt and the shame she felt about the fire, always absorbing that guilt and blame when really it wasn't even her cross to carry. And she had lost her truth. They had made her feel so bad about herself because of this episode with Reed on top of everything else. They put all that blame and shame on her too. She had just lost her truth. And she came back and she listened to Fisher, again, to me, the Fisher of Men, saying, "That's not who you are. I've always known who you are. Don't you know who you are?" And she had to reclaim her truth. So one of the main themes in Perennials is lies versus truth. And another theme in Perennials is time, the passage of time. We see that I play with that all the way through the book. And at first it's almost jolting or jarring, where I jerk you back and forth to the past and the present. And until you get that that's part of the book, you might be going like, what, where, But that's how life works. We'll be going along in the grocery store, and all of a sudden we see somebody, or we hear a song, or we see, it's like Silver Lining Playbook. I don't know if y'all ever saw that film, and you're just jolted back to a moment of trauma. It's a trigger for us. It's time travel in a way, and it jolts us back to that moment of pain that we haven't quite yet processed and healed. Our brain is constantly bringing us back to what we haven't quite learned. And so Lovey kept spinning. It's like you're walking along on your path, and then all of a sudden you meet that evil energy, that evil force, and it starts spinning you in a vortex because you don't quite recognize it as evil yet. You don't know who's right or who's wrong, what their truth is, what your truth is. And you just spin and spin and spin until you finally go, now I remember who I am and where I'm going. And then you can get out of it. But your brain's going to keep bringing you back. And so in the story, I play with the passage of time. Bitsy is terrified of aging. She doesn't know who she is if she's not the beautiful homecoming queen at Ole Miss. She does not have another identity. She doesn't know who she is at her core. And she fights against it with everything she has. Whereas Laurel has totally embraced the changing of the seasons. She is at total peace with the passage of time. And then we see Chief, where we have no control over what happens from one minute to the minute next. Chief, who likes to kind of take the leadership and know that he's got everything under control, no control. And so Lovey's just trying to figure it all out. Figure out where she got stuck. That's the point of her. And she's seeking everywhere. She's got this fragile faith too, right? She's trying to come back to what she believes. She doesn't know what she believes quite anymore. And she's seeking everywhere. She's trying to go back to that quiet place in herself, whether through it's yoga or meditation or the medicine wheel in Sedona. And she's just seeking anything she can find to go back to herself. And in the end, it's home. It's home that brings her back. Again, it's just an image that comes to my mind. I have friends who do character books. They really do. Like, they'll go through magazines or things online and choose an actor or a movie star or just a random person online, and they'll build a whole character around that image. They'll have all their details and descriptions written down, all organized. I'm just not that organized. It just comes through me. I don't know how or why. But I can picture them very clearly in my mind, how they are, how they dress, where they shop, what they think, what music they listen to. They're real to me. But they're never, the only time I ever based a character on a real person, and it really wasn't based on a real person. When I wrote The Feathered Bone, I set it in my real hometown, Walker, Louisiana, and I did a lot of research with the Livingston Parish Sheriff's Department because I grew up with the sheriff, the guy who's the sheriff now. He and his wife have been lifelong friends of mine. So his name is Jason Ard, and he helped me research a lot about Livingston Parish and trafficking, and I worked a lot with the state police department of sex trafficking and all of that. Jason Ard and Erica, his wife, were so helpful to me, and I built a sheriff's character in that book. It's not Jason, but as an honor to him and the help he did, I let them help me name the character J. Ardwan after Jason Ard. It's not his story, it's not him, but I drew details about what kind of gun they carry, what kind of trucks they drive, all of those details were based because of the information he gave me. So that was kind of the only character that ever really stemmed from a real person. I'm never ready to turn it in. It's never good enough. It's never complete. It's never finished. Their stories are never done to me, and they do live with me forever. And I have readers ask me, they want more about Millie. They want to know about Millie's daughter. Millie, and I guess because there was a sequel too to that story, they just wanted to continue. They wanted to keep going. And I would love to do that too. I love those characters so much. But Perennials and The Feathered Bone felt done to me after they were published. Like, I haven't been hungry to go back and tell more of those character stories, but they're still in me. They always will. It's like your children. It really is. I love Sedona. I'm drawn to places where people go seeking something bigger than themselves. Wherever that is. A lot of my readers were offended that I had a scene at the Buddhist stupa. My character, Lovey, is not a Buddhist. Her faith is Christian. But she has a friend who's Buddhist, and they're walking together on a hiking trail, and her friend stops and spins the stupa. Well, actually, her friend's not even Buddhist. Her friend's just open. And Marion, the 95-year-old woman that I adore, that doesn't offend me. I think we shouldn't be offended by the way other people search and seek for deeper meaning. And so I like to explore the different ways people try to connect to something bigger than ourselves, whatever that may be. So Sedona feels like a very powerful place to me. In The Feathered Bone, it was that little tiny church in the swamps in Louisiana, the chapel. That's a real chapel in the swamps. It was built by real people on the river in Louisiana by floating down logs down the river and hand carving 3,000 cypress shingles and building this sweet little chapel by hand and making the pews. There's no more spiritual place than that. A community that comes together to build some place sacred. So to me, that little chapel in the swamps, or Sedona prayer circle, or the prayer circles in the top of the Rocky Mountains that I show you in When Mountains Move. There's always going to be a place for me where people are seeking something bigger, something more. And honestly, you know what it was in Perennials? I know I created a garden in the story and a Mary garden, but the whole thing that sparked that idea for me was coming here with Angie years ago. I'm telling y'all, I fell in love with your community from the start. I always threaten I'm going to move here, and one day I probably will. came out to New Albany, with Into the Free. It was really the first time I'd ever come out here, and I just loved this community. I love the people here. I sense this incredible group of strong women here who are vibrant and alive and active, and you make this town an amazing place to live. And y'all have inspired me in so many ways from that. And so I always told Angie, I want to write about New Albany one day. And then I thought, I've always loved Angie's work. I knew how hard she worked for the paper down here. And I thought, what if I write it about a small town paper? Papers were folding like crazy. And I love a local newspaper. I think they're important, and a local news station. I think they're important to tell the local stories and keep people connected. So I came and shadowed Angie for a whole day. She was kind enough to let me do that. An amazingly stressful job, incredibly tough job. And I followed her everywhere. We went out to the Wolf Preserve. We went to the schools. She was doing stories on all this stuff. And in between her hectic schedule, she brought me by here and introduced me to Jill. And if I've ever been impressed by somebody, it was Jill. I just loved Jill's spirit, her knowledge, her kindness, her compassion, her warmth. And I thought, wow, this town is impressive. Y'all have the most amazing people here. And you have this amazing museum. And I never even knew any of this was here. And I'm 30 minutes down the road. And while we were here, we went to the garden. And I almost cried. Because I will tell y'all, it moved me so much to try. I didn't know who had built that garden. I'd never met any of y'all in the garden club at that time, but I pictured who you might be. And I pictured these women who cared enough about your community and your home and your people and the stories of your people and the landscape that inspired those stories to come here and break ground together and tend the roots together and tend the blooms together and create something beautiful and lasting to hold this community together. There aren't a lot of communities that have those kind of people that will work together to create something beautiful and meaningful to celebrate the people of that town, to find the funding, to create something like this. Y'all have something special here. You really do. And I thought I was going to write the whole novel about New Albany. It didn't turn into that, which proves that you don't always, everything doesn't always end up what you think it's going to be. But I still had to put New Albany in there because it sparked the whole idea for the memory garden. It led to the whole book. Angie and Jill and the y'all who built the garden. So thank y'all. Well, I just feel like I just won the Pulitzer to get Shara Owen's approval for this book because you were what scared me. I was like, what did I get wrong? Shara Owen's going to know this is wrong. Shara helped me so much, and the Garden Club and Jill with this research. I couldn't have done the research without y'all, honestly. And Jill was so patient with me. I would ding her at crazy hours in those last minute edits. And she just answered sweetly and kindly. And I know she was rolling her eyes on the other end of that phone, but she was always helpful. And, y'all have really opened your minds and your hearts and your souls to create this story. So any research that's right is because of y'all's work that y'all shared with me. And I appreciate that very much. I say every time I speak, every time I write a story, I have to believe that on the other side, the right person will receive it in the right way at the right time. And I just trust that whether that's one person or a million people, it doesn't matter. If one soul got what they were supposed to get, then that's a good thing. And that's how I approach it. And you're right. It always amazes me. Like Angie said, she had underlined a lot of stuff in the book. I love to hear which verses spoke to different readers. It's always something different. And I love hearing that kind of feedback because I never know when I'm writing it what's going to stand out to you, what's going to mean something to you, what's going to make you care or cry or heal or forgive or whatever you need to do. Thank y'all so much.